In 1988, a mine surveyor named Francis Ona quit his job at Panguna, picked up a case of dynamite, and blew up the power line feeding one of the biggest copper mines on Earth. He wasn't trying to start a war, he was trying to get paid. Panguna sits on Bougainville, an island near the eastern tip of Papua New Guinea, closer to the Solomon Islands than to PNG's own capital. Australian colonial administrators had opened the mine in 1972, 3 years before Papua New Guinea existed as a country at all. Geographically and culturally, Bougainville belongs to the Solomon Islands chain, not to Papua New Guinea. It ended up part of PNG because of a 19th century colonial map, not because its people chose it. Bougainvillians are also visibly darker skinned than most of PNG, a difference locals have long used to describe themselves as a distinct people, not a PNG province. This wasn't Bougainville's first attempt at breaking away. In 1975, days before Papua New Guinea itself became independent, Bougainville's own leaders unilaterally declared a separate country, the Republic of the North Solomons. It lasted 6 months before it was folded back in. At its peak, that single mine produced 44% of Papua New Guinea's entire export earnings. The government in Port Moresby held 20% ownership in the mine. Landowners whose ground it was dug from held less than 1.25% of the profit, and close to 1 billion tons of mine waste went straight into the rivers. Villages were relocated to make room for the pit. Rivers that fed downstream gardens ran gray with tailings. Landowners had been asking for years to renegotiate. Nobody in Port Moresby was listening. Francis Ona had worked at Panguna himself, surveying land for the company digging it up. In 1988, he filed a compensation claim for damage to his own clan's land. It went nowhere, so he quit and started sabotaging the mine instead. He called his fighters the Bougainville Revolutionary Army. By May of 1989, they'd knocked out enough power lines and equipment that Bougainville Copper shut the mine for good. One of the largest copper and gold mines on the planet, closed by a few dozen men with stolen rifles and dynamite. NASA has photographed the abandoned pit from space. Decades later, it's still one of the most visible man-made scars on the planet. Papua New Guinea sent its army in to reopen the mine and crush the uprising instead. Ona and his fighters retreated into the mountains. A fight over one mine had become a fight over the whole island. In 1990, PNG pulled its troops back and sealed the island instead, a total blockade by air and sea. No fuel came in, no medicine came in. It lasted almost 8 years. Historians estimate the war and the blockade together killed somewhere between 15 and 20,000 people, most from disease and untreated wounds, not gunfire. Nobody agrees on the exact number. There was no one left to count. Islanders crossed to the Solomon Islands in open motorboats at night just to bring back malaria pills and cooking fuel. It was the one gap in the blockade PNG's navy never fully closed. In 1997, Papua New Guinea's government tried something else. It signed a $36 million contract with a foreign mercenary company to storm the mine and crush the rebellion by force. PNG's own military commander refused to go along with it and exposed the deal publicly instead. Riots broke out in the capital. Within weeks, the prime minister who signed the contract had resigned. A war over one island had just brought down a national government. One of the young men who picked up a gun in those mountains was 19 years old. His name was Ishmael Toroama. He rose through the Bougainville Revolutionary Army to become one of its field commanders, fighting PNG's soldiers for most of the next decade, in the same jungle Francis Ona had vanished into. By 1997, both sides were exhausted. New Zealand hosted secret peace talks. Toroama, by then the BRA's chief of defense, sat across the table from the same army he'd spent 9 years fighting. On the 30th of August 2001, Papua New Guinea and Bougainville's leaders signed the Bougainville Peace Agreement in the town of Arawa. Ishmael Toroama put his own name on it. Bougainville got an autonomous government and a promise of a vote on full independence within 15 years. Francis Ona refused to sign anything. He walked deeper into the mountains, cut off even from the fighters he used to command, and stayed there. In 2004, he crowned himself King of Mikamui, ruler of a nation that existed only inside his own territory. 10 months later, he died of malaria in his village, in his early 50s, the peace unsigned, the country he'd started fighting for still not born. Toroama put down his weapon and went home too, but to a cocoa farm, not a jungle hideout. For the next 15 years, he grew cocoa beans near Aropa Airport, the same crop his family had farmed for generations. 14 years after Ona's death, and 18 years after the peace agreement, Bougainville finally got the vote it had been promised. Between November and December of 2019, 87% of registered voters turned out. 98.3% of them voted for full independence from Papua New Guinea. That result wasn't automatic independence. It was non-binding, a recommendation Papua New Guinea's own parliament still had to approve. The next year, Toroama left the cocoa farm and was elected president of Bougainville. the 19-year-old fighter, the peace signatory, the farmer, now running the government trying to finish what he once picked up a rifle to start. In 2021, Toroama and PNG's government agreed on a target date. Bougainville would declare independence by 2027, the 1st of September, specifically according to Toroama. "I cannot pre-commit the timeline," Papua New Guinea's Prime Minister James Marape told reporters when asked to confirm that date. The two governments can't even agree on how many votes it takes to ratify the referendum. Bougainville says a simple majority in PNG's parliament is enough. PNG says its constitution demands 2/3, the same threshold as any other amendment. There's a second fight buried inside the first. Restoration money for Bougainville has been flowing through individual PNG members of parliament instead of straight to Toroama's government. He's called it out publicly and warned that if it continues, Bougainville might not even hold its own elections in 2027. Even Bougainville's own politicians admit the island isn't economically ready. Its budget still depends heavily on grants from Port Moresby. Independence would mean walking away from that money too, with no copper mine left to replace it. By late 2025, Marape was promising the vote would reach parliament within months. By mid-2026, he was calling it almost a fait accompli and pointing to early September as the date parliament might finally decide. If it happens, Bougainville will be the first new country born anywhere since South Sudan split from Sudan in 2011, and the first one in the Pacific in nearly 50 years. 6.5 years after Bougainvillians voted, that vote is still just a promise. The war that started it killed as many as 20,000 people to close a single mine. If Papua New Guinea's parliament finally votes yes this September, the man signing Bougainville into existence will be the same one who, at 19, picked up a rifle to shut a mine down. The surveyor who started this never got his compensation. But the fighter who finished it might get a country. Thanks for watching. Subscribe for more.